The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Jesus proposed another parable to the crowd, saying, "The kingdom of heaven may be like a man who sowed good seed in his field. While everyone was asleep, his enemy came and sowed weeds all through the wheat, and then went off. When the crops grew and bore fruit, the weeds appeared as well. The slaves of the householder came to him and said, 'Master, did you not sow good seeds in your field? Where have the weeds come from?' He answered, 'An enemy has done this.' His slaves said to him, 'Do you want us to go and pull them up?' He replied, 'No. If you pull up the weeds, you might uproot the wheat along with them. Let them grow together until harvest. Then at harvest time, I will say to the harvesters, first collect the weeds and tie them in a bundle for burning, but gather the wheat into my barn.'" The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
My brothers and sisters in Christ, I don't know if you keep up with the things that come out of Rome, but it has just been decreed that we are no longer allowed to use gluten-free hosts at Mass. So just be aware of that for those who have a gluten intolerance. Now I know some our parishioners, at least I don't know anybody that has it, but sometimes we have visitors come that have a gluten intolerance, and they will come to me either before Mass or will say something to me at communion time. But we are no longer allowed to use gluten-free hosts. They're no longer considered to be bread because it has no gluten in it. So from now on, we cannot use them at Mass. So if you have some friends that receive gluten-free hosts, you might want to advise them that they're no longer allowed to be consecrated, they're no longer valid to be used at Mass. So we can do such a thing as getting low gluten hosts, and I'll check into that. It's either that, or if somebody comes, they can ask if they can let me know ahead of time before Mass starts that they have a gluten intolerance, and I can give them, if I don't have a low gluten host, or if it's too much even for them, as I had a lady a couple of weeks ago who literally was shaking when she was telling me not to touch the host with my hands because I have gluten on my fingers from giving communion. And I told her, I said, I doubt if there's enough gluten on my fingers to kill you, but, you can't self-communicate, so I have to give you the host either way. But from now on, we will no longer be using them. But you can always let me know ahead of time, and I can reserve the precious blood for you. As Catholics, we all know that Christ is present in both, fully and completely. Body, blood, soul, and divinity in the bread, body, blood, soul, and divinity in the blood of Christ as well. So if you have a gluten intolerance, you need to catch me before Mass, let me know. I'll reserve the precious blood for you, and you can receive at the end after everybody else has received. So I'm just informing you, for those who may not be aware of that, and most of us here don't have a problem with gluten, but every once in a while we do get it. You may know somebody that has it. You might want to inform them if they come to visit here that I will not be able to use a gluten-free host. Sometimes people bring their own hosts because I don't keep any. I don't know if you've ever even chewed on a gluten-free host. It's like chewing on a 1-year-old dog bone. You could throw it hard enough, it'll stick in a wall. It's the strangest tasting thing I've ever tasted. It's just plain weird. But anyways, I want to talk a little bit about something that sometimes brings things to the surface. I don't know why, but it does. I want to talk about the instructions on the manner of distributing Holy Communion and how we are to receive communion. Every time, no matter what parish I've been in, when I've given a homily on how to properly receive communion, somebody always yells and screams and writes a letter to the bishop, "Oh, Father this, Father that," and so on and so on. When in reality, I didn't say anything but what the teachings of the Church recommend. And I have documents to prove it in writing. I made a copy of it just to make absolutely certain if anybody wanted to see it. These are the official teaching documents of the Church. So what I want to do is let me go back a little bit into history, and we'll begin with the Church as she comes into existence, as she comes into history. as she begins her journey in time and on earth. For the first 3 centuries, she faces persecution. She's underground. She's in the catacombs. Mass is sometimes said in people's homes with the curtains drawn, in people's basements, and so on and so on. It was also a custom at that point in time to distribute communion in the hand. And oftentimes, people were even allowed to take communion home with them. Because if the authorities came knocking on your door, you could at least take the Eucharist, what they call the mystery. They didn't call it the Eucharist right away, but they call it the mysteries. You could take the mysteries to give you strength. You know you're about to be arrested for your Christian faith, and you would have the mysteries, you could receive them, and hopefully it will give you strength, of course, and courage to persevere in your sufferings, and so on and so on. Now, in the year 323 AD, the emperor, of course, Charlemagne, converts to Catholicism, and from that moment forward, he announces Catholicism as a religion of the empire. And the church came out of the catacombs, it came out of the homes, and people started building churches. And from that time forward, about the 4th century AD, the church looks at the way she does things. There was a need in a particular way to do things, certainly during the times of the persecutions, when the church had to endure a lot of things, but now she's free to do what she needs to do and can do. So the decision was made that no longer was communion to be received in the hand. You were no longer allowed to take the host home. From now on, only those that were consecrated to God can give communion, which was the priest or the deacon. No lay people were allowed to touch the host. From that moment forward, for the next 1,600 years, one received kneeling and on the tongue. And then comes the Second Vatican Council. Begun in 1965, ended in 1968. And with it comes a lot of things. Now, what's interesting about the council, the council itself never changed a thing. It didn't define any dogmas, didn't give us any other revealed truths. It certainly clarified things for the modern world. And there were many, many beautiful documents that were written that came out of the council. Now, Paul VI decided to ask the bishops around the world, after the Second Vatican Council had already come to an end. He took a survey with all the bishops around the world and he asked them, He asked them 3 questions. Do you think that attention should be paid to the desire that over and above the traditional manner, the rite of receiving Holy Communion on the hand should now be admitted? First question. Second question, is it your wish that this new rite be first tried in small communities with the consent of the bishops? Third question. Do you think that the faithful will receive this new rite gladly after proper catechetical preparation? To all 3 questions, the universal answer was no. Do not change the rite of communion. Do not distribute communion in the hand. That was never changed by the Catholic Church ever. For 1,600 years and after the Second Vatican Council to this day, the universal norm of receiving communion is on one's knees and on one's tongue. If you go to Mexico, if you go to some parts of Europe and other parts of the world, you receive on your knees and on your tongue. Benedict XVI, the last year and a half of his papacy, absolutely refused to give communion in the hand to anybody who was standing. He had a kneeler brought out, whether it was a private mass or whether it was in the big square of St. Peter's. You knelt to receive communion on the tongue. He would no longer give it in the hand for the last year and a half of his papacy. And some of my brother priests, we all took notice of this. And the old adage says, as in Rome, so in the church. So we figured, now that Benedict is doing this, maybe we're going to go back to this. And many of my brother priests certainly were very grateful because they liked the idea. Francis came along, never said anything about any of it, but now has stopped distributing communion in the hand as well. So I don't know what will happen next. Let me tell you how it came about that people started receiving communion in the hand. This is something we should have been taught years ago. Maybe somewhere along the way a priest gave a homily on it when we were younger. I don't know. But I don't remember in many decades of my own life of going to Mass, even every day, a single priest ever given a homily on how to receive communion properly and explaining to me the difference between kneeling and on the tongue and in the hand. I've never heard a homily on it, so I figure it's time. And the reason I do that is because I have never dropped the host. In the years of my priesthood, since I've been here, it's happened 4 times. Because people receive in the hand, and I know we have a lot of visitors and things, and people have a particular habit, a particular way of receiving communion, and they're very distracted oftentimes. They're not paying attention to the mystery of what is about to take place. So they sort of receive in a hurry. They put their hands out and already turning, walking away. Like a football player who's trying to catch a pass and he's turning to see which way he's going to run, drops the ball. So 4 times the host has hit the floor. I think it's time I said something about proper reception of communion. It was when John Paul II was first elected, his very first year. He was a new pope. The German Bishops' Conference came to him in Rome and asked for an indult to distribute communion in the hand. And he said no, he wasn't going to grant it because it wasn't the universal norm. Why should he grant it to the German Bishops' Conference, even though he knew quite well that it was so far out of control that the German bishops had not kept an eye on it? The priests had given communion in their hands long before they ever got permission. He knew it was out of control, but he did not want to grant them permission. So the German bishops threatened him with an open schism and said, if you do not give us permission, we will rebel publicly against Rome. We will no longer be connected to Rome, and we will have nothing to do with you. Can you imagine somebody saying that to the Pope? But they did. So the Pope, being newly elected, didn't want to cause a schism, gave them permission. He knew how difficult it would be to rein back in anyways. And the reason it was so prominent in Germany especially is precisely because it's the way the Protestants do it. Back 500 years ago when the Protestant revolt came, Catholics, the first 10 million Catholics that broke away from the Catholic Church, what we call the revolters, there was priests included, and they didn't really know what to do. They only knew they wanted nothing to do with Catholicism. So they took out the stained glass windows. They made the churches look like regular buildings. There were still priests who said a mass. But people didn't want to receive the way the Catholics did. So they did the exact opposite. As an act of rebellion, they stood and received in the hand because Catholics knelt and received on the tongue. It was born out of rebellion. So the church tried to protect the Eucharist in all these centuries. Well, needless to say, the American Bishops' Conference got wind of it. So they went to Rome, asked the Holy Father. The Holy Father knew that he'd open up a can of worms that would be next to impossible now to stop. He knew the problems, the desecrations that would come with receiving communion in that way. We would lose our understanding of the sacredness of what we're receiving. There would be all kinds of incidents and happenings and the stories that I could tell you about some of the things that I've heard my brother priest tell me. He knew there was going to be an issue, but they threatened him. So he signed the indult with tears in his eyes. He didn't want to do it. But he gave the Bishops' Conference in the United States a command. He said, for the next 6 months, I want you to discuss it among yourself, come to a conclusion, and then send the discussions that you had to me in Rome, and I will read them. Then if I deem it worthy, I will give you permission. Well, I don't know if that ever happened, but I'm sure it did. Then he also said that you will take an entire year to instruct the people on how to receive properly. Now, I've been going to church many years, long before I was ordained. Like I said, I don't ever remember a priest ever telling me how to receive communion. I always had the habit of kneeling and receiving on the tongue. That's just the way I did it. Did I have priests tell me to get up? Absolutely. Did they try to force it in my hand? Absolutely. But I wouldn't take it. I would get up out of respect, but I would not touch the host. I didn't deem myself worthy of it. Nobody ever explained anything. It wasn't until I got into the seminary that I got the proper liturgical instructions, the history of what happened, that I'm now sharing with you. I had a priest friend of mine tell me that they caught a lady taking the host back to the pew. She sat in the back. She broke the host in half, gave half of it to her dog, a Chihuahua, sitting on her lap, and took the other half. One of the ushers saw her doing it. Can you imagine? Giving the Eucharist to a dog? What kind of a sense of awareness of the sacredness does this individual even have? That is a sin that can only be forgiven by the Pope, if he'll even grant permission to be forgiven. It is an absolute sacrilege of the highest order. No bishop could absolve her from that sin. Only the Holy Father himself could do it, and he could deny that forgiveness as well. And then another priest friend of mine told me that one day he was in a church and he decided to look underneath the pews. Maybe he was going to take a gum count, I don't know. He found 21 consecrated hosts stuck underneath pews. He couldn't believe it. He couldn't believe it. And the only way that these hosts got there is they got into people's hands. They didn't take them. Didn't want them. Didn't realize there was something sacred. Maybe licked them and stuck them underneath the pew. And these are just some of the stories that I've heard. I've had my own experiences over the years. I had a man one time come up to receive communion. He took the host and I saw him walk away. And I followed him. I stopped the communion line and followed him. And I said, "Sir, You need to take that host, and I need to see you take it now. He said, I will. I said, no, sir. I need to see you take it now. He said, no, I'll take it when I get back to my pew. I said, no, sir. You must take it before me. I have to see it. So red in his face, he went back to his pew, and I followed him. He threw the host at me. It bounced off of my chest and landed in the ciborium. Thanks be to God. He stormed out of the church, cursing and all kinds of red in the face, and out he went. Why even be in church if that's the way you're going to treat God? But there are countless of stories. In John Paul II and many of his writings, especially on the Eucharist, talked about the danger in the modern world of losing the perspective of the sacredness of the Eucharistic mysteries. When you leave here today, you will leave here differently than you came in. Because today, when you receive the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Christ, you will have the second person of the Blessed Trinity dwelling within you, which you didn't have maybe when you came in. But you'll have it when you leave if you receive communion. If you're in a state of grace and you can receive communion. God comes to dwell within us. He makes our home within us. It's something that communion in the hand sort of has lost along the way. But since the Bishops' Conference has allowed it, there's not much I can do about it. For those that come forward to receive in the hand, there's a proper order to things. But before I forget, as long as I am here, no matter where I'm at, I've got retreats I got scheduled all over the place, no matter where I'm at, where I say a Mass, I always tell people you may kneel and receive on the tongue, if you so wish. I will never deny you. So, but receiving communion in the hand. First and foremost, we make a throne for the king, right? Not the one-handed thing that people do. If you're holding a baby, they come forward with one hand. What happens if the baby slaps the hand or grabs the host? I have one person who comes up to me for communion like this. I don't even know what that means. I have no idea what the gesture even expresses. Am I supposed to put it in your hand? Do I put it on your tongue? Do I put it on your nose? What? So I simply started putting it on his tongue, and I guess he got used to it, so he doesn't so much do this anymore. But then I have the snatchers. They like to grab the host. Then I have the trappers. Doink. As soon as they get the host in their hand, they're right on top of it. Like the thumb wrestling with the host, right? The trappers, I call them. Then we have the hoopsters. They like to play basketball. And hopefully to God we don't miss, right? And then there are those who receive in the hand that receive, they don't even look. They've already turned away before they even know the host is in their hand. I've had to literally catch people's hands because they're already walking away. That's how confused it's become. Now, I know we have a lot of visitors here, and you may do it, I don't know how you do it in your home parish. Maybe the priest in your parish has done a homily on it, maybe he hasn't. But at least you'll have a better sense of awareness of what's taking place, how to receive communion properly. Now, I've given this homily about 6 weeks ago at the 5 o'clock Mass. I didn't do it at the rest of the Masses because I was talking about something else. But I decided this weekend I was going to do it at all the Masses. I did my research work. I looked into the documents of the Church to see exactly what she says about receiving communion and how to receive it properly, always on one's knees and on the tongue. It is the authentic teaching authority of the Church in her documents. The hand, receiving communion in the hand is what we call a particular norm. It's not a universal norm. A particular diocese does it in that particular way because a particular bishop has allowed it. Now, I can't go against the bishop. He's my boss. He's my authority, and I'm not going against the bishop. I'm just telling you, you have an option. You don't have to be stuck receiving communion in the hand only. There are many good Catholics who wish to receive worthily, who wish to receive on their knees, but they're afraid to. Who want to receive on the tongue because nobody's ever told them, so they're afraid to do it. So they receive in the hand because it's the only way they know. But from this day forward, you will know you have a right. You have an option. Should any priest ever deny you decide to kneel and receive communion on the tongue, should any priest ever deny you, you have recourse to the Vatican. You have recourse to the Vatican Embassy in Washington, D.C., and the Holy Father himself has said that he will reprimand any priest who refuses to give communion to somebody who wishes to receive communion on their knees. So it is a universal norm. It's perfectly A-okay. You have an option. And I just want you to understand that. You don't have to write a bunch of letters to the bishops. When I do a homily like this, I've always found in every parish I've been in, people like to write letters to the bishop. Father Stone said this. He said that. I can't do this, because we hold on to the way we do things. And we don't want to change. Oh my God, Father Stone, don't disturb my atmosphere. Don't disturb how I live my life. Don't disturb how I go to Mass. Don't tell me to do something different, or so on and so on. People are very comfortable in their little pew lives. But I want you to know there's an option available. Don't be afraid to try it. You're going to be surprised. It won't hurt you. God is not going to smack you upside the head, and neither am I. So these are the options that you have. I want you to be aware of it, and from now on I will place a man here, and I will place a man over there, and they will keep guard. No one will get past, if we receive communion in the hand, no one will get past that individual. We had somebody at 5 o'clock Mass last night. We had somebody last week at the 10:30 Mass go past and go back to the pew, and I told the ushers, no more. No more. It stops here. You stop them. If they don't want to receive communion and take it immediately, you bring them back to me. And I'll settle the issue. Because the idea is, even if you receive in the hand, you take a step to the side, whichever way you're on, and you take the host, you put it in your mouth, you receive it, and then you go back to the pew. You don't keep it in your hand. It's disrespectful. Remember whom you are receiving. You're receiving the living God. And the problem in the modern Catholic world today, for us, it's become a little bit more like the Protestant mentality. It's whatever I want it to be, whatever I think it ought to be. Instead of being an objective belief, it's become a subjective belief. In other words, whatever the subject thinks. And if I don't think it's Jesus, then it ain't Jesus. Well, it doesn't matter what you think. It is Jesus. Absolutely. Outside of your subjective belief, objectively is the absolute presence of the living God. Body, blood, soul, and divinity. I believe that deserves a little respect. If not everything we can give it. Now, I give this homily with charity and with love, because I can honestly say most of us, probably at least my own experience and with other people that I've spoken with as well, never had any instructions, have never known the history of how communion was given and so on and so on. So I give it to you for that end. Now you know. The choice is yours to make.